Okay, just wanted to start off with a few housekeeping rules. So just for the sake of, background noise and disruption, I have everybody on mute other than the presenters, but we definitely want this to be an interactive meeting. So if you have something to say, or you have some feedback for us, or maybe you have a circumstance in what's, happening in your business today that you'd like to share, please, unmute yourself and we can have that conversation. But in the meantime, I will hand it on over to Scott. But again, thanks for joining us today. And Scott, take it away.
Thanks, Shannon. Thank you all for joining us today. As it says here, I'm the Vice President for the Marketing and Commercial Services Group for our Global Account Division, which you are all members of. Like Shannon said, this is an interactive session, so please feel free to ask questions throughout and provide commentary during this session today. As many of you know, Edge is now a pervasive tech movement. Many organizations are now moving to the Edge, and it's really table stakes to do so and consider your strategies around there. We are heavily invested in this space right now, and we think we can be leaders here in the market. A lot of people have opinions about their own Edge movements, but we wanted to really lead the way on this. And we reached out to a company here recently, IDC, a highly respected global analyst firm, and we conducted a survey in the last 30 days with some really key insights in that. We're going to be publishing that survey here in the next few weeks. But one of the things that stood out to me was that over half, nearly 2/3 of the respondents said that they would be conducting Edge pilot programs in the next 2 years, driven by the following things: reducing operational costs, improving customer experiences, and improving quality. So we're really excited about the game-changing nature of Edge at CenturyLink, and the technologies that will enable organizations from financial services to manufacturing. Again, this is an area that we're invested heavily in, and we're well positioned for the growth. So today, we're going to hear about examples of the benefits of the Edge, where our customers are having success, but also taking a look at where there may be challenges in this journey and potential pitfalls that come up along the process. So today, I'm really happy to bring in both Bryn and Dave. Bryn runs our global solutions consultant team, and Dave leads our product management and innovation team. And both of them have strong point of views and examples of use cases that I think are going to be very informative to the individuals on this call. So thank you for joining us today. Again, let's keep this as an interactive session, and please feel free to chime in where appropriate. Thank you.
Morning, afternoon, depending on where you guys are sat, and I hope you're having a great day so far. Just a quick side note, Shannon, could you possibly reach out to Dave? He's just having a wee challenge with Zoom. If that's
yes, I'm talking to him now.
Cool. And if you want to pass me over the share, I will start sharing from my side. Just give me 1 second. Thank you, guys.
Yep,
We're getting used to the new norm of collaboration technology. So yes, good morning, good afternoon. Today I want to talk a bit about the emerging workloads that we see are driving the transformation across enterprises as a whole, and how they're becoming more feature rich. That's driving a lack of tolerance around latency for both applications and users. We see it from our side. Technology is continuing to change the way we do business. We're all living COVID at the moment. Yesterday I was reading a review from MIT that stated that they believe that e-commerce has jumped forward 5 years in the last 3 months. And of a way that what we're beginning to believe the new norm is, as it were. In today's world, we look at it, the digital experience needs to be robust. This puts a lot more pressure on businesses to produce and manage these environments to ensure that businesses remain competitive. Plus, you've also got this classic challenge of being bimodal. You're under pressure to innovate, but at the same time, you're under pressure to keep the lights on. No one is tapping you on the shoulder and saying, hey, your budget has just increased 5, 10%, go fill your boots. We're all under this constant operational challenge. To leverage the new innovations, we're seeing a significant rise in the number of interactions with local devices. The impact this has is on performance and the production of data. This changes the landscape and creates greater levels of complexity. And it also drives the need for greater enhanced security and operational requirements that form part of that. You're taking your hardened processes around centralized data, and now you're having to change those to operate in this new environment. Finally, modern workloads and data move close to end users. Development teams are battling legacy systems. I'm sure you've all got that one app that you wish you didn't have. And the security architectures that can't scale. So you've got all these different pushes and pulls as we're trying to keep pace, which is driving challenges. I mean, you know, this ultimately inhibits continuous DevOps integration, workflows, and reduces underlying potential business performance. So what this is kind of poking at ultimately is that technical debt where we all have a level of within a world. So I'm Bryn. I'll be presenting today with David Shikosis. We're going to take a deep dive into the challenges and triumphs of the life of the edge. I'm going to share some real life case studies of where we've been able to enable business transformation on the edge. And Dave will walk through key areas that you need to consider as part of it. So what we're trying to do is give a bit of a balanced view. So we'll be playing good cop, bad cop a little bit today, because sometimes edge is not the answer. So how to capitalize. First bit I kind of want to open up with is a bit of a level set around innovation and technology. And I like to share this with my teams. You know, ultimately throughout modern history, we've gone through different innovation cycles. And a lot of it is about how we interact with technology. In each of these revolutions, there's been some common component parts. So that's new cheap inputs, products and processes. If you look at the first revolution back in, again, using modern history as the lens, go back to 1760, we saw the enablement through steam, driving innovation to move from cottage industries to mills, for instance, the spinning jenny, and the change in the landscape was significant in Europe. At the end of the 19th century, we saw one of the largest shifts up until now. And this, you know, this is branded as multiple different things. Sometimes it's known as a Gilded Age. Sometimes it's known as the Second Industrial Revolution. But during this period of time, we saw a significant impact on the US. At the start of the revolution, the UK made up 20% of the world's GDP. By the 1920s, the US had taken over with over 20% of the world's share of GDP. And this was driven by underlying symbiotic technologies coming to the forefront of human interaction. So you had oil and gas, you had steel, you had electrification, mass production, communication, and people don't talk about this bit as much, but investment banking. And underlying this, there were key technologies. You have the internal combustion engine, so the ability to move a mobile power unit, telephony, the telephone, and electricity. Now, if we jump forward to the 1950s, we see what's coined as the third industrial revolution, or the next wave. And this is when we start to look at an electronic or digital innovation. Again, same key factors appear. So we had cheap inputs, products, and processors. So you have the silicon superconductor, you have the integrated circuit board. By the mid-1960s, Moore's law was coined. We saw a rapid growth of compute and an advancement in technology. And by the end of the 1960s, we put a man on the moon. Well, most of us agree we put a man on the moon. If we jump forward to 2010, I'm going to throw out there that we are potentially in the largest evolution of technology to date. The fourth revolution in modern times could have more impact on the way that we do business than any other that has gone before us. And when you start looking at what's impacting us today, I see some common themes out in the marketplace. So I'm going to ask Shannon to throw up a quick poll, because I'll be really interested to get feedback from you all at this junction on whether or not you see some of these key technologies impacting your world. And I'm looking at some of the attendees here around GlaxoSmithKline and others. And I would imagine there's going to be some impact there, again, looking at some of the new press you're putting to market. You know, if we think about COVID today, you know, again, like I said, we've all been living through that, the way that we have reacted is fundamentally different to the way we've reacted to these types of incidents in the past. So if I look back to the SARS outbreak of 2003, it took nearly 6 months to sequence that virus from the 16th of November to the 12th of April. MERS in 2012, again, had a similar timeline as SARS. But then we look at COVID, we have that information within weeks. Of that. That was released. As some of you on this call will very well know, there are 20 vaccines. When I last looked at this, actively being worked last month. Germany trials had started. So we've gone from sort of widespread outbreak in January within a 4-month window to go into a situation where we're now looking at the vaccine or potential vaccines. And ultimately, a lot of this has been enabled by technology. I mean, if I look here at some of the key variables that I've thrown up on the screen, the cost to sequence a human genome has gone from $100 million in 2001 to somewhere around about $1,000 today in 2020. And it's forecasted by the end of this decade to drop to about $1. And a lot of that has been enabled by edge compute, the underlying decrease in the cost of processing power, GPUs, and artificial intelligence is driving this innovation. And again, this is going to open up new markets for us and new opportunities. Gene editing. This will potentially revolutionize medicine. This enables cheap and rapid write capabilities to correct defects and cure diseases. And we start thinking about what impact that could have on society. It fundamentally could be very profound. We could end up in a situation where we're adjusting the human lifespan significantly. I've read papers where they're talking about curing aging, and treating aging as an illness. What does that mean to how we work? How does that mean to how we financially plan? What does that mean to new markets and new opportunities that haven't been even thought of yet? And again, it goes back to some of these core technologies. Underlying all of this is AI. And it was interesting, I had a brief look at the poll there. The vast majority see AI impacting your world. And I would absolutely categorically agree with that. We're seeing a rapid rise in deep learning. As a form of artificial intelligence, ultimately inspired by the human brain. You're in a situation where machines no longer need a programmer to tell them what to do. Instead, machines use data and fidelity and quality and volume of data to train themselves, removing the traditional need for the army of coders to build new programs. The traditional model could, ultimately is expensive to develop and take products and services to market. It can be very fragile, open to human error, and also very difficult to maintain. But ultimately, it will never, ever exceed the capability of the human programmers. When you start pivoting to deep learning as a software that is not written but trained, and again, it's about the fidelity of data and the quality of data, which we'll touch on in a bit. We can create a learning framework. And those systems learn the right behaviors. And ultimately, the key point here is they can outstrip the quality of the human interaction and the performance and how we've set those bars. So again, opening up new opportunities. An example right now, if any of you are wearing an Apple Watch, they're leveraging AI to understand and track and predict arterial fibrillation. They're also looking at diabetes and sleep apnea. Again, that is all enabled by deep learning. Robotics. I assume that robotics is touching quite a few of you right now within your sectors. We see the way that we're using robotics fundamentally changing. You've got the traditional robotic model, which will be programmed again under a traditional framework that can move through 3 axes to carry out a repetitive task. But the thing that we're seeing now, especially within the lighthouse manufacturing environments, is a shift now to cobots, where robots are designed to interact with a human being as part of an immersive experience within a working environment. And again, leveraging deep learning to do that. Now, sounds expensive on the face of things, but the other thing that's happening during the backdrop here is a significant decrease in the unit cost of industrial robots. So 1995, Average cost of a robot was 125, 130K US. By 2025, we're predicting that that's going to drop to around about $10,000 to $11,000. So we start thinking about how we build our manufacturing business units, how we kit out factories. Again, going back to COVID, how do we make environments safe for workers to return? Robots are going to play a bigger part of that. And again, we need to be prepared for how we're going to support that environment, because we're taking a fundamental shift on how we've built fabric to date. And finally, I just wanted to touch on 3D printing. I mean, this is one for me that I could see value in it, and it was interesting, but until I started actually digging into the nuts and bolts of it, I didn't actually realize to a point the profound impact it can have. So ultimately, 3D printing, it shortens the design to production time, shifts more power to the designer. There is a manufacturer that we're working with at the moment that had to ship templates from Beijing to Somerset in the UK to test that template before they started production, and it added 6 to 8 weeks to their production cycles. They can now take the image, print it locally at site, and give feedback straight back to that manufacturing unit, taking that cycle from 8 weeks down to 6 hours. And it's really beginning to allow them to innovate as a business. Also, the other piece that comes back to is that you can now begin to think about, how do I couple 3D printing with deep learning? How can I use that intelligence to drive and construct new structures that have new properties? So a really good example of this is Boeing. They've got their new advanced turboprop engine, ATP. They call out 4 direct impacts from 3D printing into their new production line. So first of all, the number of parts on that engine have dropped from 855 to 12. They believe that their fuel burn has lowered by 20%. The weight has reduced by 5% for that engine unit. And there's also some work they're doing with engine mounts as well. And they've been able to reduce their test schedules by half to 6 months. So the direct impact to them as an organization is that they've been able to reduce the unit cost of a plane by $2 to $3 million just by that one adoption of technology. But again, these things are linked. As we've looked at previous cycles over time, they're symbiotic. It's not just one technology standing up in front. It's about how they begin to interact with others, which are really key. So, I mean, as I begin to move forward a little bit here, you know, this is one of the quotes that really stands out to me when we start trying to think about what's going on around us and how we adopt and leverage these new technologies. You know, the greatest challenge and the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence itself. It's to act with yesterday's logic. And the overwhelming integration of these symbiotic technologies into our life, you know, as I've said, is referred to as the 4th industrial revolution. You know, this revolution, much like steam, electricity, semiconductors, in the earlier iterations, is driven by data. Data is the new fuel of this period of time. And hopefully that's no surprise to anybody here today. Data generated by these innovations are going to have a level of impact on all of us in some way, be that in our personal life, be that in our business life. The challenge we have is to start to think about, how do we capitalize on these? And again, I'm going to keep coming back to these innovations are going to drive fresh thinking about how we support those within our sectors. All of this is about, how do we drive good business outcomes? How can enterprises use data to change business processes, create compelling customer experiences, open up new markets, and improve productivity, and enable us to discover new revenue sources, or to maximize current revenue resources? We all want to be a disruptor in our market rather than disrupted. You know, ultimately, we've all had the adage, no one wants to be Blockbuster. We all want to be Netflix. So again, it's about, how do we begin to jump onto these technologies in a pragmatic way that enables us as an organization to leverage them. So to take advantage of innovation, to be a true digital business, not only do you need to excel in being connected, you need to excel in being connected to your customers, to your suppliers, your partners and stakeholders at all times. You also need to do this anywhere in the world. And it needs to be easy. You need to be easy to engage with. Connectivity becomes a fabric for the digital business as it becomes increasingly more data-driven, as we've discussed. and capable of delivering innovative products and services that drive greater revenue. The challenge, though, while at the same time enabling business to increase productivity, you need to be able to make rapid business decisions. A really good example of that when you start thinking about manufacturing is about how do you get a feedback loop into a digital twin? How do I take that data? How do I act rapidly? Coupled on this, again, like I said, timely manner. Data loses value over time. The longer the data sits and rests, the value decreases. Also, you need to be thinking about the fidelity of your data as well, and making sure that you're acting on the right information, because unless you've got quality data, you could be making bad business decisions. And ultimately, this all comes back to is how do you acquire, how do you analyze, how you act on that data, be that locally or at the edge or back at a centralized facility. These three variables appear in whatever scenario you begin to look at. To achieve this vision, we believe a digital business must focus on three key pillars. So an adaptive network that can move between billions of devices and locations, between the site, the edge, or to data centers and cloud environments worldwide. And again, we're going to touch on those three things. Edge isn't everything, it's part of that conversation. Agile IT infrastructure, this needs to be able to flex and allow quick development and simple management of applications in a hybrid cloud environment. You need to have the ability to fail fast. You know, we're adopting new technology. Some of it will work for us, some of it won't work for us. And you need an infrastructure and scale up and scale down in a timely manner. And allow you as organizations to evolve at pace. And we'll share with you some of the ideas we have about how we're doing that for our customers today. And finally, a connected security that actively protects critical businesses and your data. Data is absolutely key in all of these scenarios. The other thing that will happen as you look to adopt these new technologies, your threat landscape is going to fundamentally shift. Your attack profile is going to look different. Technology and controls and processes that were in place 5, 10 years ago are no longer going to be pertinent in this new world. So again, we see connected security as a real key component of this new world. There's also a couple other areas you need to consider when we start looking at this. And there's just two that I just want to touch on briefly. These need to become part of your ultimate thought process. So firstly, compute has evolved. I think we're all pretty familiar with this, you know, and again, going back to that model of that revolution, cheap inputs, products and processes. Over years, there's been swings on the way that we consume compute. We started with mainframe, we moved to the client server, the PC, as the unit cost of processing became less, everybody had that sat on their desk. We went from structured data to unstructured data. We now move back to the cloud, but we believe at edge computing is decentralizing that swing of pendulum with a difference. If you can imagine a pendulum moving between those different areas, you genuinely believe the gravity of benefits of a cloud to be so great that the pendulum simply stops at the edge. And it now becomes about how you begin to capitalize on it. So the decentralized swing is forced by any features of the cloud deliver. It is driven by opportunities. And we're in a world where new applications are appearing that can't abide by the traditional models around latency to drag it back to the centralized environment. So this is what we want to begin to capitalize on. So we believe that this is now the resting point of those types of interactions, that pendulum. The second piece is cloud itself. And this is probably more focused if you're consuming it at an application layer. But when we begin to look at this sort of lens, you know, they tend to build in a monolithic structure. They build out their services and applications to try and solve for the masses, to keep conformity in their operating models. So they solve for the 80%, not the 20%, which is fine, you know, but it makes sense for them to do that as organizations. But as businesses trying to consume that technology, there can become some friction around compromise. Also, we start looking at the whole latency conversation about how do I go back to those centralized locations. This has been the way for many years. The challenge, like I said, with that monolithic environment, it becomes difficult to adapt to a world where technology is moving at pace because, again, it's solved for 80%. You may be the corner case. You may be the outlier. You'll be the innovator. You're blazing that trail. How do you operate an agile environment? when it's constrained by those monolithic application structures? And also, how do you break down those traditional cloud-based developments by offering a flexible alternative? But again, we're going back to that fail fast. You know, the one-size-fits-all scenario carries a level of risk at times, and again, can't be tailored to all businesses and processes that sit out there. So there's two areas I want to throw out there. But ultimately, where we're looking at the approach we're taking as an organization is say, look, Industry 4.0 requires us and you to think beyond the traditional data center and also the network. The landscape is changing fundamentally. So the network in itself does become part of that data center conversation. So just want to throw out here a couple of agree or disagree, because I'll be really interested to look at the feedback from you guys on the team. And Shannon, you're jumping ahead of me. How dare you? So the first one I've got for you is, again, some great stats from Gartner that I wanted to share. And again, I would love for you guys to give us your feedback through this on IT and OT convergence. We hear a lot about this. We hear a lot about asset-intensive industries where the CIO will be responsible for both operational technology and additional IT, and see that as an integrated strategic imperative. I'd be really keen to get your views on that. So that's the first poll. Just give it a couple of seconds. Then Shannon, if we can close that one down. So all of you agree, which is good for Gartner. It means that Gartner's on pace and has the right finger on the pulse. So got another one for you, team. So again, going back to Gartner, I find their data incredibly useful. So they predict by 2020, so we're only talking 2 years away, that 50% of enterprise data will be generated outside of the traditional centralized cloud or the traditional data center model. So again, really keen there to get your feedback from this group and to see where your thoughts are. So I'll just give it 1 second, take a sip. Okay, so we've got some disagreement there. Good. Good, that's interesting. That is interesting. So, final one on agree or disagree. It's about augmentation. So, and immersive technologies. Humans and machines will integrate by 2022. 70% of enterprises will be experimenting with immersive technologies for consumer and enterprise uses, but only 20% will have deployed to production. Now, one of the things I'm seeing at the moment, some of the customers I directly integrate, I believe that this is moving forward at a greater pace than Gartner laid out last year. One of the reasons being COVID. I'm working in the entertainment sector. How do we do safe interactions in those spaces now? How do they open back up? That's also changing. So if we close that poll down, and again, we've got an agree and one disagree. So again, thank you. Very interesting. It's good to get some insight from you all as part of this. So we've got the change in technologies. We've got new symbiotic innovations coming through. We know that there's going to be a level of evolutions. So what? All of these produce a workflow, a workload. And what we're seeing is a band of different workloads and workflows appear across the globe. And the key thing is across the globe. It's not centralized around one market. It's a trend we're seeing across all markets. And what we're seeing develop is this Goldilocks belt, this blue belt here, you know, where the latency and requirements for that digital interaction to get that closer to the user or the device is driving the infrastructure play. And again, it's quite interesting about how these evolve. Some are getting quick traction, some are not. So these workloads begin, you've got these workloads, you've got your Goldilocks belt. So what do I do now? How do I leverage those? So we take these new workloads and we look to deploy them in the most appropriate location. And again, it's not a one size fits all scenario because we're looking to get the right outcomes for the organization. We've talked about how the options have and the evolution of compute models. So you've got the premise-based, the traditional model, security, you know, where you've got deployments put on the edge or on a prem with a one-size-fits-all approach. Okay, this does lead to increased cost and capital based on higher management and operational overhead, but in certain situations, this might be the right answer. And we'll touch on one of those use cases shortly. Centralized cloud. The cloud centralized environments we've talked to still have a very important part to play, and not for a second am I suggesting that edge will replace the traditional cloud model. It's more about how it coexists as part of that. And again, it's about where is the best location to act and how's that data to get the best result for what you're looking to achieve as an organization. And finally, edge. The edge deployment for us is about how we can deliver centralized compute in a non-centralized manner. You know, again, we're not prescribing to an environment about large amounts of unstructured data spread across the globe. This is about the benefit from getting that accelerated customer experience, getting compute closer to the user and transaction. The opportunity is to have an approach that enables across all of these different areas. Again, I'm going to keep coming back to getting the right outcome for the right operational need that you're looking to drive as an organization. So I'm going to touch on some use cases. I'm going to touch on three for you. So we'll dig into a financial services company with low latency requirements. We're going to talk a little bit about a production facility where Edge is enabling their pivot to a centralized capability. And finally, we're going to look at a multinational logistics company and how we're helping them evolve and take advantage of some of the symbiotic technologies that we've shared. So these are the three areas I want to explore. So let me start first with the fintech. So what are they? What they are a proprietary trading unit. They're taking outside investment, so that's leading to a divestiture of their organization. They had a traditional IT stack. They now need to spin up and set up a completely new IT services infrastructure. It needs to be global, and it needs to be a quantitative trading platform, so it needs to be able to scale. The other piece that they're debating as they go through this is about, I now have the ability to build out greenfield. Do I want to set that management structure within my organization, or do I frankly want to make that someone else's problem and buy that back as a service? So it's not just about the digital interaction in market, but it's also now about the service experience they're looking to drive as part of this. So the challenges for them, fundamentally, they had incredibly aggressive timelines to deploy in 4 countries. And again, they wanted an absolute solid foundation for rapid growth. There were some very aggressive projections around how they plan to grow over the coming years. As mentioned, they had no IT staff because it's greenfield. Do they want to drive that sort of OpEx cost again in their organization? The other challenge they also had was around compliance and data sovereignty and where data would reside. And David will talk later about the 4 forces. And it's again something that we had to work very, very closely with them to understand the compliance impact on the adoption of this new structure. So the solution that we delivered back to them is a fully managed IT infrastructure as a service, including compute, storage, network, security, and connectivity driven into all of the markets. We deliver that and manage that 24/7 by a tailored support team who build out a service wrap based around their operate model, rather than again going to the one size fits all. Ultimately, the result for them is that it's a CapEx light. We built in such a way that it could scale up to 50% of a drop of a hat, and they have a linear cost model. So they're able to map their costs directly back to revenue and customer interaction, which has made it very predictable for them as part of their seeking through their investment cycles as well. The project management and compliance, we were able to support that and enable their transition. So again, great story here about how we've looked at not just a rapid growth to market, about how do I get the compute transactions in market, but also how do I navigate some of the other forces when you start thinking about building out those environments. And ultimately, we're giving back to them a service model that is technically agnostic. It allows them to innovate, it allows them to be agile, it allows them to fail fast, and ultimately is a seamless global experience. So they got consistency across the planet. The next one is a lemon squeezing. I don't know why, but this one always makes me chuckle a little bit. So in this one, the customers realized that squeezing lemons at every store location across continental US, they were wasting up to about 40% of the value of the lemon. because there's a secondary market where you could sell the oils, the pith, and ultimately what they would shoot is for, how do I realize 99% value of that lemon? And how do I leverage a secondary market, a secondary revenue stream off how I can use those waste products to generate more revenue? Also, they were looking at their operational performance from a person hour perspective. So they believe they spent 1 million person hours a year in the US alone squeezing lemons. How do I make that go away? How do I free up those staff to be more focused on the customer experience and driving quality within the store? So basically, we help the customer build a fully wireless enabled factory. Now, interestingly here, we actually help them and we deliver and manage the compute room environment on site, because this facility is in a lemon grove in South California. It is quite some distance away from connectivity. It's in a very remote location. So it's where we've looked at a hybrid model of both premise and edge delivered and managed as a solution for that customer at site. The room is using CenturyLink private cloud, again, extended to that site. Like I said, we built out that custom edge solution. We've also put direct connectivity in the full redundancy. We put a security layer in place. So that factory is a lights out factory. It's got 3 to 4 individuals who are managing that facility 24/7. There are 30 to 40 different applications at site that are being run on that platform. But also, when you start looking at the manufacturing facility, and again, we start talking about cobots, we start talking about AI and automation, there are 17 different vendors that are involved with ensuring effective uptime. So the other part of what we've done for this customer is built an environment where those 17 individuals can come in a secure manner and interact with that environment to make sure they can get that data in a rapid way. So again, I'm going back to that act and analyze, so we can start looking at advantages of how they can tune that environment. So we're going into the realms of digital twin as part of that. But again, we've delivered that on site for the customer. And finally, the last one is quite an interesting one. So this is a global logistics firm. They're exploring automation and augmented analytics and what that can do for them as an organization to ensure that they don't become disruptive and are a disruptor. So they're looking about, how do I increase productivity at all of my locations? So their goal is to look at forklift productivity. So forklifts, they move across the location when they're dispatching goods. How do I make sure that forklift is full 95% of the time, not less than 50% of the time? So that's a challenge that they're looking to do. And their model had historically been to build out compute facilities at all of those locations. Well, we've said, well, hang on, let's start thinking about how we can use the network as that compute facility. So we've done some analysis with them. We're working with, they've got 1,500 plus locations. We believe that we can serve 95% of those locations within 5 milliseconds or better by using just less than 100 CenturyLink edge nodes, edge locations. So it starts shifting their cost model dramatically, and how we can begin to enable them to carry out this innovation. So, you know, just give an example of a coverage of the type of edge environment we're talking about here. So we've made, as part of this also, when you start looking at how we've built this out, we can also, and we are, creating an agnostic aggregation point. So that if they want to start looking at 5G, if they want to start looking at other connectivity issues, we can bring that together in a secure manner. So we're talking about things like community of interest networks and creating an ecosystem where they can leverage that compute on how they want to interact with their other businesses and users. So wanted to lay out what we're doing on the edge. I'm now going to pass to Dave, and Dave is going to talk to you about some of the challenges and the approach and maybe how you want to be thinking about that edge journey and your take on it. So I'm going to pass over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Bryn. I will pull up my slides and we can get started. Okay, so we'll go quickly through some of the, what Bryn, I think, did a really great job of is talking to us about, you know, the overall value and opportunity, and a lot of opportunities we see for transforming industries, innovative new workloads, the fourth industrial revolution, a lot of immersive technology opportunities, but there's some challenges as well. So we wanted to start, just take a quick tour through some considerations for how you should be thinking about the challenges that face you around edge computing, sprawl, security, and then forming up a real cohesive strategy for how to think about edge computing and what it means for your overall approach. In this first kind of context of sprawl, it's one of the most fundamental challenges of edge computing from the standpoint of all smarter devices, more places to collect data, more places to run business logic that either pre-processes, enriches, or drives value against that data. But you're looking at a lot of unique locations. You're running and operating IT in places where you aren't typically running and operating IT. You're certainly beyond your centralized computing facilities. You're beyond your cloud. You're running technology and processing power and storing data in places where you have limited IT staff and varying degrees of operational dynamics. You're also thinking about how to drive business logic and information technology processing into environments where you may be forced in the early days to really drive and push for some one-off design concepts, right? Get the software to work, very constrained and directly focused software development practices against some very specific operational technology, vendor-driven use cases. A lot of times getting those technologies up and stood up in a very traditional mentality from a software perspective leads you to conclude that we should be trying to change this as little as possible. Right, let's minimize the number of changes for this particular edge computing solution. And whereas the rest of IT is moving towards a mode where success is defined by how many times you can change, right? Getting a software-driven delivery pipeline, enabling your developers to go and react to the data they're observing, analyze, and then act upon the data that is being collected really comes down to, from a software perspective, having a consistent software-driven environment that can change as much as possible as driven by operational changes and operational conditions in the field. And so the software layer of consistency, of being able to deliver consistent, well-integrated change is certainly a challenge that's increased by sprawl. And then the hardware challenges of making sure that your hardware footprint is flexible over time. The kinds of technology that's going to be suitable here is probably very different from the kind of technology you're traditionally buying in your core data centers, right? You need things that can be more ruggedized. You need things that can be able to react to different power conditions. You need to maybe think about taking things that are embedded inside of the network CPE, wireless CPE that you're already putting out onto those locations. So trying to merge and really streamline that footprint for what you want to be running on-prem. And then you're going to be thinking about what you want to actually host and run inside that facility, and then what you want to maybe think about, as Bryn was talking about before, running inside the near edge of the network and figuring out where those services are going to lie. And so we wanted to maybe take a quick second to poll the audience here and understand a little bit about how you're thinking about edge sprawl. And it really comes down, when you're thinking about tackling the sprawl challenge, is whether it's worth it. And so we'd love to just get everybody's, you've heard sort of some of what Bryn's talking about in terms of great use cases and innovations where we see companies and industries facing down the sprawl challenge. What does it mean in your business and in terms of your IT strategy? Are you a believer that you simply can't run everything in the public cloud or your core enterprise data center, and you think that there's very important reasons for tackling the edge sprawl challenge? You think it's maybe important or somewhat important? You think there's varying degrees of convincing, or you really haven't even started to think about edge computing? Would love to get the audience's feedback on how you're thinking about edge sprawl. And so certainly, nobody of the folks that are voting here, not everybody is all in on everything running in the centralized facility. There's certainly definitely think there's some opportunity there. So so it looks like we have a good number of folks that are sort of cautiously looking at figuring out how the return on investment will play out. So that's good to know. The second main wave of challenges that we talk a lot about are obviously those risk factors, right? And that how there's many new types of network patterns and obviously a different physical and data footprint that you get presented with that at the edge. The network patterns that are important, really, obviously there's an element of running a workload or business logic in an edge computing environment. It's running at that edge computing environment because it needs to talk to something local, right? The business logic that is talking to a device or a thing or a sensor or any kind of edge connected digital interaction, that needs to traverse a workload network out there at the edge that is typically going to be at lower latency or in closer proximity to that digital interaction. And so that's important, but those are, in some cases, those are networks that aren't designed for highly transactional business logic. So designing the local workload network becomes new and different. You also need to make sure that whatever you're using to manage and push code to those environments also has a similar secure network pattern path, right? So you're not just thinking about writing software, pushing it from GitHub directly into your AWS environment or your enterprise data center where you're running code. You're also thinking about how am I going to have those code pushes roll all the way down to my edge computing locations, whether they're at the near edge or on the facility prem. So making sure that you have a clean and secure management access path is a new network pattern that is certainly more diverse. And then all of those roads, we all know that edge computing is not going to replace cloud computing. It's supposed to complement it. It's as per that sort of pendulum metaphor that Bryn was talking about earlier. And so all roads from a data standpoint still lead to a centralized public cloud or private cloud inside the enterprise data center for longer term analysis. So you need to make sure that there's good and expansive cloud connectivity to your enterprise location for longer term analysis, whether that is, again, in the public cloud or on customer prem. And then you have a larger physical footprint. Obviously, there's just more devices, right, that are subject to physical tampering or device theft. A lot of those devices are now, if they're running processing or if they can store any kind of data, they are vulnerable to different types of information security threats and vulnerabilities and attack vectors than you ever had before. And so understanding how devices, how the native security built into those devices and how you're managing identity, how you're managing confidentiality of data, all of those threat vectors that are presented by all of the smarter devices and things that are inside your physical footprint that need to be factored into your overall pattern. With all those new network patterns and all that new physical pattern, you're also now seeing a much broader data footprint. You know, a lot of the data that's being collected in edge computing use cases can oftentimes be intensely personal, right? Your location, health statistics, video signatures, audio signatures, and all of these things, when they start getting correlated together, can start to take on a much different data, a much different data footprint and a much different risk profile around highly correlated events where a whole bunch of data points are organized together. A lot of times organizations are thinking about their data footprint as something they want to be able to clean off very quickly and really extract the value from a data event through stream processing, understand that something important happened at a period of time under a specific metric, and then flush all of the raw data so that they don't end up having to retain it and potentially have that be subject to some kind of a data breach. So there's a lot of different ways of thinking about your data footprint for what data you need to keep, what data you should probably just flush, and how do you then verify that you are indeed ridding your enterprise data footprint of data that you choose not to retain by policy. And so all of those security elements are all woven together in a lot of these in a lot of these edge computing scenarios. And we'd love to, again, poll this audience for those of you that are thinking about edge computing. When you think about these types of scenarios, whether it's in any of the use cases Bryn talked about earlier or the use cases that you're thinking about now, which concern challenges you the most? Is it your network being able to securely connect all these devices together and be able to reach and transport all the data between the edge all the way back to the public cloud? Or is it the physical device vulnerabilities presented by all these now smarter devices out in the field? Or is it the broader data footprint that you're now going to be responsible for? Which one of those do you think is the highest level of concern as you think about your security posture out at the edge? And with a little bit of time there, appreciate everybody chiming in. So it's interesting from a network standpoint. Being able to securely make all those connections all the way out to the edge is important, but certainly it seems like there's a number of other votes, for the others. So it seems like there's, broadly speaking, an equivalent level of concern that the audience has across all those security vectors. So that's interesting. The final point we would wrap up with here is that anything around edge computing as a technology, edge computing really isn't a discrete technology. Edge computing is more of a strategy, right? It's a technology strategy to start thinking about ways that you can achieve business success. And we really think it's important to have a cogent strategy approach towards edge computing before we just go start piling in and starting to experiment and play around. And there's a framework that Tom Bittman over at Gartner likes to talk about, we think is particularly helpful. That there are basically 4 main reasons why you would want to run a workload out at the edge of the network. It's either driven by the physics of lower latency, the economics of bandwidth avoidance, right? Of keeping, instead of moving all the data to a centralized location, you keep some of that, you keep that data storage out local, and you basically just get what you need from it locally. The law of the land, you may be in many cases required by some statutory policy to be able to run things in very specific geographic locations. And then you can't always assume that a device is going to have ubiquitous, clean, consistent network access. Cruise ships and far-flung remote locations, you might not need to be able to run processing in areas where you don't always have consistent network connectivity. And so that intermittent connectivity of something that could go wrong or something that you can expect will go wrong is another reason to put business logic out closer to the edge. And then the fundamental digital interactions that are going to potentially be pulling one of those workloads closer. So interactions between things and people and business models, whether it's business model policies applied to things from an automated maintenance standpoint, whether it is some of those embedded technologies that are going to be interacting with people and their nervous systems and their sensory perceptions, interacting with things or other business models. All the different ways that these 3 things can interact digitally is going to be a potential reason why a workload would be pulled out closer to the edge. And we think that's a very helpful way of thinking about edge computing. It's fundamentally about moving workloads closer to digital interactions, driven by one of those forces, defined by one of these combinations of digital interactions, and thinking about a strategic plan for the use cases that will drive those combinations. Right, so what are the digital interactions that you are thinking about, and what are the one of the 4 drivers for generating business value by better modeling, by better data acquisition, by better analysis, and by better action against the data that's created inside of those digital interactions. Those are the use cases that organizations want to think through as part of their strategic plan. There's certainly, in doing that, you find that there are resource constraints. There are architecture challenges about overcoming some of those software and hardware patterns that we talked about earlier. And there are strategic partners that you can look to that have some unique assets to help you get to faster time to value. And we fundamentally think about faster time to value as we talked about before, taking the same kind of agile practices that you're running in your centralized data center or the public cloud, and making sure that you can go and achieve those out at the edge, right? That you don't want edge to be an agile-free zone. You need your edge to be as adaptive and as agile as your core data center is. But so before we get there, let's sort of talk to, I'd love to understand from this audience, what is your level of innovation velocity? How fast do you feel like you're getting time to value inside your current IT today? Just to sort of poll the audience, how do you think of yourself as an agile digital business today? Or you think you're at sort of an expert level, many innovations, multiple deploys a month across a lot of the data estate that we have across IT and OT? Or are we fairly advanced, right? We're doing monthly deployments. We have many different sources of enterprise data that's enriching our innovations. We a few times per year, or we don't really think of ourselves as a digital enterprise. Those are kind of the other sort of lower maturity types of models. And we see that probably the majority of the audience here thinks of themselves in that sort of moderate moderate level of maturity in terms of digital business success. And that's pretty typical. As we talk to different parts of our enterprise customer segment, we do tend to see the majority of companies that when they're taking a look at themselves, they still think of themselves as moderate. Not a lot of companies are coming in and talking to us about, we're already expert and we have this all solved. So for those of you that think of yourself as still sort of in that moderate, digital business maturity, you're certainly not alone. And in fact, you're probably part of the majority. what does the digital business need? And we've talked about this pattern. Bryn, had this graphic up earlier on in the presentation. We fundamentally think it's evolution around the enterprise data that you control, acquiring it from the sources that you're producing, analyzing that data for actionable insight, and then taking action against it. That's the fundamentals of the digital business. We think that there are critical elements that you need in order for that to run. However, we think of edge computing in that process as really a turbocharge to that data engine. Right? You're acquiring data from many more sources. You're analyzing patterns in closer to real time. You're acting upon that business logic a whole lot closer to the digital interaction to drive new types of insights and potentially acquire more data from more sources in so doing. So really, we think of it as a huge opportunity for asset-intensive or interaction-intensive industries to enable innovations that you weren't really able to think about before, right? So it's all about acquiring more, analyzing better, acting faster, while maintaining an adaptive security policy against the sprawling, higher footprint, more diversity in your IT, in your overall IT domain. And so we think that there are ways to get started that require developing a strategic plan for going and starting to think about how edge compute can help you with some of those asset intensive or interaction intensive industries. And there are partners out there with some unique assets, and the kinds of companies that have assets that can help you acquire more, analyze better, act faster while maintaining adaptive security are important to keep in mind. And CenturyLink, the only little commercial here in all of this, has a portfolio that you can order off of a catalog that can deliver solutions from anywhere from the global cloud core all the way out to your physical premise within 5 milliseconds of most of the interactions between things, people, and business models anywhere around the world. And we can deliver this in a very flexible model that actually meets your innovation pipeline. If you're the kind of company that's already developing software and have your own highly instrumented delivery pipeline, we can help you with physical real estate. We can help you with network. We can help you with maybe some bare metal, compute level resources. We can also start moving up that stack and helping you manage at the virtualization layer and give you a virtual form factor to deploy into. And then we have a managed services layer from a security standpoint, from a device management standpoint, and from a professional services standpoint that you can layer over the top. And so the final question I think we would love to wrap up with here is just sort of getting an idea of what are the strategic partnerships you would think about as you're thinking about maybe evolving that edge computing footprint. If you did need to go out and start thinking about an edge computing set of patterns that would allow you to analyze, acquire, and act upon data in your built environment with a whole lot more effectiveness, and select all that apply, right? I think that you could be working with a selection of different providers, but do you think about really working with your hyperscale cloud partner and some of the edge computing offerings that they're thinking about? You want to really work with whoever it is you use for your mobile network to think about how their mobile network can help you. Are you thinking about more of a network solution provider that is fiber-based and can run a network solution to be able to reach with the global scale of those assets and service capabilities? Are you thinking systems integrators, right? Some of the more traditional consulting organizations that can weave together a variety of different vendors? Or are you thinking about working in sort of the co-location realm and the physical footprint realm of companies that are doing large and small physical data centers to be able to expand your IT out into the built environment? So as we look at the results of that, a good sort of a broad mix here with the enterprise network solution providers and the hyperscale providers sort of running neck and neck there as it were. So that's great, super feedback. We hope some of those polls were informative to you. Certainly they're informative to us, and I think as we start to think about this audience and a more broader audience that we've been talking to a lot about the edge, I think a lot of these responses are pretty typical from what we've seen with other customers in the enterprise segment. And so with that, we'll turn it back over. I think I missed the very beginning, so I don't know who kicked us all off, but I'll turn it back over to Scott, I think, for wrap up and
yeah, Dave, thank you, and really appreciate everyone's time and joining. Hopefully this was a valuable use of your time today. I would encourage you all to feel free to reach out to myself, Dave Shakochis, and Bryn Norton on LinkedIn. If any of you would like further meetings around that, please feel free to engage with your local a CenturyLink representative, and we can get Bryn or Dave or myself on any type of meeting and take this conversation further. So thank you again for your time today. We really appreciate it, and have a great weekend. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.